Well, welcome everyone to this session on creative SQL views for reporting in Acumatica. This is the only slide that I have for the session. I like putting everything in a blog post, so I'll give you about 10 seconds to write that URL down. It's ogforums.com/AcuConnect 2024. You can refer to that during the presentation or immediately after. I like putting the notes there. That way you have access to it right away, even during the presentation. So that's everything you need. There aren't going to be any slides other than what you see on the screen right now. So I'll give you a few more seconds to write that down, ogforums.com/AcuConnect 2024. And with that, we'll just flip over to that blog post. So you can see it up at the top, ogforums.com/AcuConnect 2024. And let me zoom in a little bit. So these are my double quote slides for the session. Now, my original intention for this was to have like several SQL views, but I ended up changing gears last night and decided to go a different route instead. So we're going to do like a more comprehensive example with some SQL views involved, but a more comprehensive example. But because it was so last minute, this pivot, I'll circle back at some point and make this post look prettier. And I'll probably add in some additional information and screenshots. But in the meantime, at least this will give you the complementary info for the presentation, including the SQL code. So you can see this all here on the page. The overall flow of what we're going to do is actually from the bottom up. So let's start at the bottom of this. So what we're first going to do is we're going to create a SQL stored procedure called custom replenishment _og. And the whole example here is that we're going to build our own little custom replenishment solution in the next 28 minutes. And then we'll present the output of that to Acumatica and see if we can pull that off in 28 minutes. It's going to store, when the store procedure runs, it's going to store the information in two tables, custom replenishment header _og, custom replenishment detail _og. So you can see the store procedure is feeding these two tables. Then we're going to put two SQL views on top of those tables. And I probably should have used different names, but these are different things in the database, but same names as the tables, custom replenishment header og, custom replenishment detail og. Then we'll come in and at this point, Acumatica won't be able to see anything yet until we then create custom data access classes. And we'll use same naming convention, but drop the og at the end. Custom replenishment header, custom replenishment detail. And then finally, we'll come in and create a generic inquiry. And that's where we can really see it in Acumatica. And we'll add a side panel onto that generic inquiry. So that's our overall flow for today. If I have time, which I probably won't, so I'll mention it now. If I have time, I'll come back and talk about why I think SQL is still very important today, maybe even more important than it was 20 years ago, and especially when it comes to ERP products like Acumatica. You can see about a 45-minute webinar if you head out to ogforums.com/ogSQL. You can also see it up here. OgSQL is a little add-on product that I worked together with an Acumatica developer to create. So you can buy OgSQL here, and you can also watch a little webinar where I go into more explanation about why I think SQL is important. And this is just a screen grab from that webinar illustrating one of the reasons why I think it's important. And that is, my guess is that there's maybe only about 1,000 people or less in the world who can create customizations in the Acumatica framework, but there's about 9.4 million who can do it using SQL. And if you think about Microsoft Excel, why is it so popular? And I go into where I came up with these numbers from in the webinar. But why is it so popular? Is because there's about 46.9 million people who know how to create stuff in Excel. And then there's way more who actually just use Excel. So that's just one of the reasons. Check out that webinar if you want to hear more of my thoughts about why I think SQL matters. But to try and finish on time today, let's just launch right into it. Now, the stored procedure that we create, that's the bottom of that flow that we looked at earlier. Well, let me just come back up to it. So this store procedure here is the first thing we'll create. This is definitely the most involved thing. And if we have time, I'll circle back at the end and talk through this. But for the sake of this presentation, you have all the code right here in this post. I'm just going to copy and paste this. So you can see, scroll all the way down to the bottom of this dark section here till you get a break. And we'll just copy this. And we'll head over to acumatica. And acumatica has always been very SQL friendly. And I remember having conversations with acumatica VAR consulting companies, boy, maybe 10 years ago at this point, 8 to 10 years ago. And, when acumatica was still newer, a lot of people were discovering it and deciding whether they should take it on as a product. And one of the consistent things I would hear from VARs that they liked about acumatica is that they could still use SQL, as opposed to like a NetSuite or another cloud ERP product where you can't just run SQL right against it. And so acumatica has always been very SQL friendly. Now, you can do this even if you're in an acumatica SaaS environment. Now, coming up with the SQL, you might need a development environment to do that, or you can use my AcuSQL product. But running the SQL is always something that Acumatica has been able to do. And you do that by coming into the customization project screen here. So I'll open that. And let's create a new customization project. I'll call it AUG replenishment. Then let's, actually, let me check this off and open this up. So this is a standard Acumatica functionality. This is how you get into doing customizations, even low-code, no-code stuff. I consider SQL to be borderline low-code, no-code. Oh, and great point about Tim saying that ChatGPT or Copilot can be your friend for writing SQL queries. I want to get better at that myself, but yeah, I've heard a lot of people it's really good at writing code. Absolutely. So we just come in here to database scripts on the left-hand side, and we'll add a script. And I'm just going to paste in my store procedure code here. Again, if I had more time, we would go through this. It's actually not as scary as it looks, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to paste it in. And I'll just use the same name. This is actually the store procedure name. I'll just use that for the script name. And click OK. Then we'll come up here to publish and publish current project. So what's happening now is, even though I'm in my web browser, and even if I was in an Acumatica SaaS environment where I have no access to the database directly, what's happening is the Acumatica framework is going through, it's taking that store procedure code, and it's now creating a store procedure in the Acumatica database. So we'll let it finish doing its thing. Oh, Johnny's doing something with ETL plus with data self. Interesting, interesting. Data self, also very SQL friendly, even more SQL friendly than Acumatica. So let this, I did just do this like in the last couple hours and it went pretty fast. So hopefully these publishing can take a little bit of time. Hopefully it won't take too long. Also, I should point out, when you're publishing customization projects, any customization project, this is something you want to do when no one else is on the system. So you want to do it in the evening. And you typically, in a production environment, you would want to lock people out before you do this. Okay, so at this point, we now have our store procedure created. And we can run that store procedure. So it hasn't actually done anything yet. But we can run that store procedure by executing it. I'm going to call it X custom replenishment. And this SQL code is very simple. It's EXEC for execute, custom replenishment. You give it the store procedure name. That's all you have to do. Click OK. And let's publish this. So now what's happening is acu-CONNECT is going through, it's running that execute statement, and it's executing the store procedure. And when the store procedure runs, the store procedure that we pasted in, it's going to go through and it's going to look at three main things. On the supply side, it's going to look at purchase orders and quantity on hand. On the demand side, it's going to look at accounts receivable invoices. It's going to look at all those three, and it's going to pull all that information together, and it's going to put it in the very top. We can see it. A table called custom replenishment detail _aug. And then it's going to take a pass because it's going to have a lot of detail in there. It's going to summarize it all by item. And if you wanted to, you could do it by item and by warehouse also. I was trying to keep it as simple as possible for today. And it's going to summarize all that and put it in custom replenishment header. So that's all happening during this publish. So we'll let it. Fortunately, this is running a lot slower than it was an hour ago. I think we only need to do this one more time though, so hopefully we'll be okay. All right, so it's now executed the store procedure. It's stored the data in those custom tables. So now we scroll back up. Now that the SQL tables exist, now we want to create the SQL views on top of those SQL tables. And the code for the SQL views is a lot simpler than the store procedure. You'll find it at the very bottom here. There's two of them, this 4-line section and this 4-line section. So we'll do add script. We'll publish the detail one. Oh, I think I need to give it a unique name. Let's just put view in front of it. And then we'll do this one. Okay, so now let's publish this. I guess we have to do 2 more publishes. So now acu-CONNECT is going through and it's creating the SQL view, or both SQL views, 2 of them. And then when it's finished, so far everything we've done is in the acu-CONNECT database. And I'm trying to look at, I think for the sake of time, I'm trying to get through, but while this is publishing, I see Bill Cox says, which aspects of SQL are off limits in acu-CONNECT? As far as I've seen, there's nothing off limits. But from a practical standpoint, I don't recommend updating or deleting data for reasons I won't go into. Like, I don't think it's a good idea to do that. You can destroy your database that way. But I do like SQL for the use case that I'm doing now, which is summarizing data and putting it in a custom table. So I'm not touching any of the acu-CONNECT tables. I'm just reading data from those tables and storing data in my own table. Because then I can do all that work like at night, have it do all those calculations, and then just use that information during the day, which is typical with a replenishment scenario. You might run it just at night or maybe a couple times a day, and then benefit from that run, you know, for hours at a time. Okay, so now we've got the SQL views created, but we've still only done stuff in the database so far. So now we need to create custom data access classes so acu-CONNECT can actually see that information inside of acu-CONNECT, whether we want to put it on generic inquiry or report or dashboard, whatever. So next we'll go ahead and do that. And to do that, we come up to this code section and we click the plus button and we choose new data access class. Now, I should point out, I'm using 2024 R1. Some of these things might have changed slightly, but for the most part, this stuff hasn't changed very much for several years. And so for the first one, I'm going to use the first SQL view. And as long as you use the same name, you put the exact same name as the name of the SQL view in the database, all you have to do is click this box, click OK, and acu-CONNECT will magically create the code that it needs in the acu-CONNECT framework. And here's an example of why, at least for me, This is way more involved. This is C# code. This is how you do development in Acumatica. It's a whole nother level than SQL. I will change one thing in here. I like to put all of my SQL views that I use for anything in one namespace. It's like an area called SQL views. That's just what I prefer to do. You call it whatever you want. And then let's do our other SQL view as well. And we'll do the same thing here, SQL views. Okay, now that should be the last time we need to go through a publish. So let's publish again. Let me, if there's anything I can comment on quickly. Yes, so the drop table. I would not drop table on an actual Acumatica table. I'm doing that on my custom tables, so I know I'm not affecting anything there. Yeah, as you can see, Acumatica allows you to run SQL code. And so if you want to be really foolish, you could run drop statements on every table in your database and just destroy your database, publish it with a customization project, and you could destroy your database in about 30 seconds. You can see these publishes take a little while, but not that long. So you do need to be careful when you're working with SQL. If you're running drops or updates or deletes or truncate, there's another one. But when it comes to an Acumatica table in the Acumatica database, I'm just selecting from that, and then I'm creating my own area. I'm essentially creating like my own little data warehouse in the Acumatica database. And I'm doing this for a replenishment example, but it could be to analyze sales data, doing any of those like intensive calculations that run really slow on live data, but you do it just one time, maybe once a day, store the results somewhere. It's a good use case for using SQL in this type of a situation. Okay, so we've gone through the slow publishing stuff. Now we've reached the point where, up at the top here, we have our data access classes published. So now Acumatica can see our custom SQL tables or SQL views, which pull from the SQL tables. And now we can go do a generic inquiry. So let's create a my custom replenishment inquiry back in Acumatica. Close out of here. We can go over to the generic inquiry screen. And you can see I was working on this earlier, but I believe I deleted it. Let's try that again. Yeah, I deleted it. So I'm in 2024 R1. This is a new button in 2024 R1. I like this. Security was always an issue with generic inquiries, but now you do it all in one step. So you publish and set security. Let's put this in the inventory workspace. And we're going to pull this data from our header SQL view. This is going to have one row for each item. And let's drop some of those fields on there. Let's put in the item. Let's put in the supply quantities from the purchase orders, the supply from the quantity on hand, and the demand from the AR invoices. And then this one is just a sum of these three columns. I did the work in the store procedure, so it's one less calculation the generic inquiry has to do. And let's take a look at it. So in about, I don't know, less than 20 minutes, we've gone from nothing, created a store procedure, created custom tables, SQL views, data access class, and now we're looking at data from that replenishment run inside of Acumatica. So pretty cool. Let's clean it up a little bit though. Like I want the actual Acumatica inventory IDs, not the meaningless database ones. So let's come in here and let's add in inventory item. Let's see here. Here it is. Let's go ahead and join over to that. And I'm sweating bullets here, watching the clock, hoping I can finish on time. I ran through this twice today, so I think we're good. But things are running slower than I anticipated. Okay, so we dropped that table on there, and then we'll put in the actual meaningful inventory ID that gets displayed in Acumatica, and we'll put in the description. And yeah, I don't think I'm gonna have time to look at the chat, but there's all sorts of things in that SQL code that could be discussed, and maybe you guys can discuss that in the chat. Let's also do, make these columns a little bit wider. And let's take a look at it again. All right, so this is looking a lot better now. We can see, again, I'm only doing one row per item. You might do one row per item and warehouse in your environment. You could totally do that. I'm just trying to keep it simple. But we can see for this Acer laptop that we've got 70 coming in on purchase orders. We've got 318 in the warehouse on hand. And for some reason, we've got 28,000 on AR invoices. And I think I really should have, I looked back all time. I shouldn't have done that. But anyways, I threw it together last night. But so numbers look a little funny. But then we've got a total overall replenishment position, just adding these three numbers up. And I made these numbers negative just so you could see that it's the opposite of the supply numbers. But you net it all together, and we're at a negative 28,000 replenishment position. Then, of course, this is a generic inquiry, so we could look at, you know, what's the worst item where I'm really in the hole? It's widget 01. We could also sort it descending and say, oh, I'm way oversupplied on this widget 04. That's just the benefit of working with generic inquiries. And you can see, like right here, I've got plenty in my warehouse. I don't have any demand, so maybe I need to cancel this purchase order for this quantity of 1. So that's all nice, but what if I want to see the detail behind these numbers? So let's pop out and create another new generic inquiry. Now this one I'm not going to actually put on the menu, but I'm going to call it My Custom Replenishment Detail. And we'll publish this to the UI, but because I'm not going to put it on the menu, I'm going to clear out the workspace and the category. So while that publishes, the reason why I'm doing that is I'm going to use this one as a side panel. You see the arrow here as a side panel on our existing generic inquiry. So we'll always go here on the menu, but then we'll have a side panel with this generic inquiry in it. And we'll get the SQL views, the detail, and we'll go ahead and grab from the detail data. We'll grab the quantity, the date. We'll grab what type of detail record it is. Is it a purchase order? Is it quantity on hand? Is it an AR invoice? And then we'll grab the actual numbers of those transactions. And then we'll grab the inventory ID, but we're only going to show this for each item individually. So let's uncheck visible to hide that. And we can come back to our original generic inquiry. And now we'll add the second generic inquiry as a side panel on here. So we'll do that with navigation, My Custom Replenishment. We'll add the detail, save that. And we'll match up the inventory IDs. So we'll pass the inventory ID from one to the other and only pull the detail for one item at a time. And then we need to change this to a side panel. All right, so now if we refresh our generic inquiry, now we've got a side panel once this comes up on the right-hand side. So we can still see the same stuff we saw before for this Acer laptop. But if I want to know, well, what's the detail behind the 70 that are on purchase order, now I just click off to the side panel. And I probably should have sorted this by date in descending order by default. Could have done that. But I can see, well, here's a PO for 50, and it's PO 2057. And here's another PO for 20 for PO 2058. And that's why the 20 and the 50 add up to the 70 right here. And then the detail behind the 28,000, well, there's a bunch of records out there. We can see all these AR records across 32 pages with all the individual AR invoices. So we got something that looks pretty good, and I don't have time to, I'm going to do one more thing, but I won't have time to, you could also do, I've done this for a client before. This is where this idea came from. This is an actual client. This is running in the real world. It runs hourly, actually, in their situation. And there's all these checkbox. You can do a business event with a trigger by action. And we're actually going to do one of those, just not on this screen. But it would add checkboxes here, and then you could have a create purchase orders button on the top. So you can then select which items you want to create purchase orders for and create the purchase orders. The only thing you can't do, which you can do in the regular Acumatica replenishment screen, is you can't double click in and change the number on the fly before you create the purchase orders. That would be really nice, but I don't know of a way to do that. If anyone else does, I'd love to hear it. But other than that one little thing, I love this because I'm able to create essentially my own replenishment process that is tailored to the business using the SQL language, where there's a lot more people out there who can do it than an Acumatica developer. And I think it's faster to do it. Even if you know SQL and you know the Acumatica development language, I still think it's faster to do this with SQL. So I like this example. Now, in the last few minutes here, let me show you one little piece that, so far we've published all of our SQL with customization projects. And the annoying thing would be that to run that execute statement where we execute the stored procedure, you'd have to publish a stored procedure every time to do that, which means every night you'd have to manually do that, which would be super annoying, right? But with AcuSQL, you can run it right here within, without having to do it after hours. But then we could even take it further. So I'm going to create another little generic inquiry in the last couple of minutes here. I'm going to call it run replenishment. I only want one line in this rec. Oh, good. You know what? I already created this one, so it'll save us some time. This is my little trick for creating like a button for someone. I create a generic inquiry. I filter it down to only have one record. And then in the results grid, I just say, click the button on the top. I call it instructions. And so what you can see here is essentially I've got a button screen. So the data is meaningless. I'm just creating a screen where I'll be able to have a button on the top. And the way we create the button is doing a business event. We'll call this run replenishment. We'll put it on top of this run replenishment, kind of a dummy screen here. Really, all I want is the button. We're going to do trigger by action, and I'll just use the same name. We'll call it run replenishment. We'll save that. And then when this button gets pressed, we're going to tell it to run an import scenario. And so this is something you would need my AcuSQL product at augforums.com/AcuSQL to do this. But all we're doing is we're putting a little import scenario on top, and we're telling it to go to the AcuSQL screen, use the results, although we're not even going to use the results. We just have to populate that field. We then want to populate the SQL command field here with that execute statement. I need to put that in equals single quotes. And then we want to have it click the select button. And then when that's done, we should have a nice little screen that says run replenishment with the replenishment button on top. And just to prove that this works, we've got 70 on purchase order right now of the Acer laptop computer. But if I were to go out and I've got 1 minute left. Let's see. I think I can pull this off. I'm just going to copy and paste a previous PO. Actually, you know what? I'm going to enter it because I have to approve it in this environment. I should have turned that off. And let's say we put an additional like 15 on purchase order. And we remove the hold. We approve it. There's now an extra 15 on PO. We only see the 70 currently, but we actually now have a way to run replenishment within Acumatica. This is now executing our store procedure. without having to do anything with the customization project. I'm in a demo environment, so it runs pretty fast, about 10 minutes, 10 seconds. I come back here. I did have 70 open POs. I refresh, and it now shows me my 85 open POs. Now, of course, what we probably do in the real world is maybe we leave this out so someone can run replenishment manually, but then we also put one out there that just runs on a schedule and does the same thing. So I made it to the finish line. Check out that post for more info. Check out that webinar on AcuSQL for more details on AcuSQL. But with that, I will end 1 minute overdue. And thank you, everyone,